All frucked up, finally making a video for YouTube after a long time away. Um, Thoughts on the sugar diet. The sugar diet for me was groundbreaking in a way because I had been low carb for so long, and I really didn't enjoy the high dietary fat content of my diet. And over time, over 8 some years, something like that, the weight had been creeping back up. The scale feedback was trending in the wrong direction, and I was really looking for something new. So the sugar diet, it definitely fit that bill of something new, even though it's not. It's not new at all. A low-fat diet, specifically a low-fat, high-carb diet, was nothing new, but it was the timing of it was right. Early 2025, I became aware of the sugar diet, and I was happy to jump in and try something out. It was the new shiny object for me. Discovering that I was fructose or fructose intolerant, depending on how you pronounce that. Obviously, I like saying fructose because the channel is all frucked up. The highly processed sugar with large quantities of fructose did not agree with me. High fructose fruit also caused me problems, and most of the juices that I was consuming also caused me to have severe stomach cramps, bloating, and so on. So my takeaways from the sugar diet, it's like, well, on one hand, I became well acquainted with low-fat foods that I enjoy, and I also overcame my fear of a high carbohydrate diet. That said, it was a miserable experience for many, many hours of many, many days for however many weeks I was on it. I went well beyond the 100 days, and I'm still implementing to some degree a high carbohydrate, low fat diet. I'm certainly staying with the low fat. But yeah, the major takeaways for me, it was knowing how long dietary fat stays in our bloodstream and how the combination of dietary fat and high carbohydrates really drive obesity. They really drive the fat accumulation. So you can eat fat in the absence of carbohydrate, or you can eat carbohydrate in the absence of fat. Either one, they really will help you, in my opinion, in my experience, actually, in my direct experience. Either one will help you cut a lot of body fat. But there are problems with a low carbohydrate, high fat diet. The ketosis, although it helps with weight loss, my experience with doing a lot of fasting and a lot of the ketogenic way of eating was that, loved ones and close friends would be like, bro, your breath smells like nail polish. So it was the keto breath. And I can see why it would smell like acetone, because of being in ketosis for so many hours, so many days. So I'm not sure that that's really a desirable effect that anyone would enjoy. I know that others, such as Durian Ryder, talk about like keto crotch, and I don't know if that pertains to just females or what, but I know that keto breath was certainly something that close friends and family complained about. Like, dude, you got to step back. Like, I'm fine talking to you, but I can't do the nail polish smelling breath you've got going on. And at the time, it was like I was not offended. That's too strong of a word, but kind of stung a little bit. It's like, well, recovering my health through fat loss shouldn't make it to where I can't socialize and sit and speak with someone, in close proximity. But that was my experience. So yeah, with the low fat, high carb, I'm certainly excited about eating the starches. Starches are, primarily metabolized as glucose, and so I didn't have the cramping or the bloating associated with a lot of the sugars and the fructose. So that was nice. And I think it's interesting that people such as like Dr. Gary Brecka, I think he's a doctor, maybe he's just Gary Brecka, but he talks about not eating more frequently than every 12 hours. I know that that spiritual leader, Sadhguru, maybe I'm mispronouncing that too, he advocates not eating more often than every 12 hours. And when you look at the math, it's like, well, if dietary fat can take 12 hours to clear our bloodstream, but we're waiting 12 hours between meals and we're not snacking, then even if you had a very fatty meal on one hand, 12 hours later you could do a high carb meal if you were so inclined, because you don't still have that dietary fat circulating in your bloodstream. So, I think the trouble we run into, and I believe that type 2 diabetes is the presence of fatty acids in our blood along with high levels of glucose. And if the fatty acids in our blood blunt the action of insulin, then our blood glucose is going to stay elevated for hours and hours. And that, to me, is type 2 diabetes in a nutshell. So if we're going to do a high-fat diet, we need to be, and I'm definitely conscious of the fact I'm saying a high-fat diet because I'm trying to look at both sides of things. A high-fat diet, we need to be selective with the fats that we eat. There's a book called Fats That Heal, Fats That Kill by the author Udo Erasmus, and he talks about being selective with the oils that we use. And then he also talks about how to treat some of the more delicate oils, if you will, such as olive oil, and not heating those, to their smoke point, whatever, because you can cause problems in heating certain oils too high. It's like, on one hand, if you were doing a high-fat diet, be selective with the fats that you eat. Be selective with the fats that you cook meals with, and be selective with the oils that you put on top of, say, salads and other dishes. But then again, if you're doing a low-fat diet that's high carbohydrate, I think we need to be conscious of that too, especially for someone such as myself that's fructose or fructose intolerant. So, I don't need to be doing a lot of soda with the high fructose corn syrup. The candies, I think typically those are mostly safe because a lot of those are sugar and corn syrup just being basically pure glucose. But again, it's like you have to be conscious. If you're doing a lot of dietary fat, be selective with the fat. If you're doing a high carbohydrate diet, you need to be selective there as well. Not all sugars are great, and although on the level of chemistry, right, like what the bonds are between the molecules, all sugars should be very similar, but fructose, for those that are intolerant of it, it's not going to work out well. You're going to have cramping, bloating. It's not going to be great. So no matter what we're doing, first and foremost, we need to avoid that combination of high dietary fat with high carbohydrate, because that's just going to help us pack on fat at an alarming rate. But if we're doing a high fat, low carb diet, be selective with the fats that we choose. And if we're doing a low fat, high carbohydrate diet, be selective with the sugars, the carbohydrates that we're ingesting, because there could be problems there too. So on a high fat diet with the wrong oils, you're going to be, destroying connective tissue, driving cellulite, weakening connective tissue, etc. And with certain high carbohydrate diets, you're going to be potentially causing bloating, cramping. It's again, it all comes back to paying attention to the details. And then if we're not eating more often than every 12 hours, and I know I'm being repetitive with this video, then we can get away with a little bit more. We could have a high-fat breakfast and then 12 hours later have a low-fat, high-carbohydrate evening meal. Protein, I know that people talk about there's no way of storing protein, where fat can accumulate on the body, carbohydrate can accumulate in the muscle glycogen, and so it can accumulate in the muscles, and it can also accumulate as liver glycogen, so it's stored in the liver. People talk about there being no storage mechanism, if you will, for protein, but protein is literally what we're made of. And anyone that's been into like intermittent fasting, prolonged fasting, they're probably familiar with autophagy, which is, recycling senescent cells, old cells, damaged proteins, misfolded proteins in the body. So in a sense, we do have a storage mechanism for protein. It's what we're made of. So to that end, a low protein diet, such as the protein sparing modified diet that Western medicine will advocate for people that are too obese for surgery, it's actually a clinically approved, hospital approved, very aggressive means of fat loss. You're eating, just protein, and you're avoiding the other macronutrients of dietary fat, carbohydrate. It does produce aggressive weight loss, and there are perks to eating a high protein diet, because no matter what diet you're on, whether you're avoiding dietary fat, whether you're avoiding carbohydrate, if you're focused on just protein, you're going to be meeting the majority of your needs. Even if it's post-workout and you're tearing down muscle, protein helps repair that. And so yeah, I'm not leaning one way or the other on a protein sparing modified diet. It's effective, high protein. I don't think there's really much of a downside. I know for myself, with more of a vegetarian leaning, not that I was raised that way, not that I was vegetarian when I was dropping 120 pounds in previous years, but I kind of feel called in that direction now. Not that I'm avoiding meat, but I'm certainly not gorging myself on it like I did in the past. So yeah, if you're doing a vegetarian approach and you want to focus on high protein, you could eat a lot of peas. Nothing wrong with that. Yeah, I mean, this video is not really all over the map, but it is kind of an attempt to be all encompassing. And yeah, I've been stable in the 260s now for a long time. I'm looking to drop more body fat because I'm obviously still overweight and not at my goals. And when I look at the timeline of doing a ketogenic approach, low carb with a lot of fasting, I took the weight off so much faster than I have with this low fat, high carb approach. But some of that was, my own mistakes, missteps along the way, overeating, etc. And, there was, when you switch from a high dietary fat intake and you jump into a high carbohydrate diet, there's going to be things that, in my case, were still in the pantry that I decided not to get rid of, not to throw out. I'm like, no, I'll still eat that. And so, part of my problem on the so-called sugar diet was there was still some dietary fat that was being ingested from time to time. And then also, I think when it comes to the action of insulin, you can end up eating a lot of carbohydrate, and based on my personal experience, your pancreas over-secretes the insulin, drives the blood sugar too low, and then you end up ravenously hungry again. And then to jump into another low-fat, high-carb meal, then, yeah, I ended up overeating. So my approach going forward is I still want to be low-fat. And to the extent that I do have fat, I want to be very mindful of what that fat is. Again, we need to be very selective when it comes to the oils and fats that we use, and use them. And I don't love the word, but I'm going to use it in moderation. We need to be selective with the fat and the oil that we take in, and use it in moderation. Still stay under like 30 grams of fat, dietary fat per day. And then I think it's important to have that 12-hour span between meals. And then if you do have fatty acids in your blood from the meal composition that you say had for breakfast, those free fatty acids have plenty of hours to clear the bloodstream. And then if you have a low-fat, high-carbohydrate meal in the evening, no problem, because your pancreas is going to secrete the insulin. Insulin's going to handle the glucose and brings your blood sugar, your blood glucose, right back down to normal levels. So you don't end up insulin resistant and having all the downstream complications of that. So my framework would be low dietary fat, 12 hours between meals. And I'm also going to have to be selective with the carbohydrate to keep the fructose low, because of my own issues with dietary fructose intolerance. I've got a FODMAP app on my phone, which is fermentable oligosaccharides, disaccharides, monosaccharides, and polyols, if I pronounced any of that right. But it's an app that shows me which foods could cause problems for me because of too much fructose. And then, I have to be mindful of the sugars, and I have to be selective there, just like I have to be with the fat. And then the protein, targeting protein is not going to be a bad thing, but I don't think it's a big requirement, especially in reduction mode when we're trying to drop body fat, because our body will definitely recycle the damaged, misfolded proteins, etc., the older cells, apoptosis, programmed cell death. So yeah, the protein I'm not super concerned about, because I'm literally wearing a bunch of protein. So once I'm at my target weight, then, which will be like at around 180, 190 pounds, based on previous experience. Once I'm at that target weight, then I can start to zero in on, okay, this is my protein requirement for the day. This is what I need for my protein intake. And then the rest is just, a sufficient amount of water, and then plenty of rest, because I've been sleep deprived for so many years, probably since about age 20 when I joined the Navy. I was definitely losing a lot of sleep in boot camp, and then standing watch, and etc. And I think that just kind of stuck with me, and I kind of fell into a frame of like functioning very well on very little sleep, and just kicking the can down the road as far as sleep debt. So I don't know if sleep debt's something that we actually accumulate year over year, but I could stand to have more sleep. I think I have good sleep quality. I just need to work on the quantity. So yeah, being selective with our fats, being selective with our carbohydrates, having 12 hours between meals, not worrying so much about the protein when we're in reduction mode, focusing on appropriate fluid intake, and then that being water primarily, and then sufficient sleep, at least 6 hours, skewing more towards 7 or 8 if you can. And then the only other thing that I'm thinking about is excuse me, the need for us to, as the thought escapes me, not combine fats and sugars, certainly, but well, I don't know. It'll come back to me, and I'll make another video about whatever it was that was a fleeting thought that occurred and then vanished into the ether. But yeah, those are the primary drivers, I think, for a healthy diet. And oh, I know what it was. The best advice I got from a rather prominent bodybuilding coach was that, whether you're calorie counting or whether you're just practicing, under eating for several days, or if you were even fasting for several days, don't go beyond 72 hours. Because based on his experience, going beyond 72 hours becomes catabolic, and that means you're not going to be hanging on to the muscle that you've already built. And then worse, it puts you into the air quotes starvation mode, where, especially if you've been cutting calories and you just keep trying to cut and cut and cut day after day after day, your metabolism slows down and basically, crashes, as they say. So I would encourage every fourth day to have an abundance of food, whatever that means to you. I'm not advocating like binges or, overeating to the point of being in pain like people tend to do around Thanksgiving and Christmas. But certainly every fourth day, ramp up the food intake till you're very happy with the amount of food that you've consumed, and then just jump right back into, your 72-hour fast, 72 hours of, calorie counting, 72 hours of under eating, what have you. But don't go beyond 72 hours. Make sure your body knows, hey, I'm safe, there's food coming, this is just the routine, and this is how things are going to go. So don't push beyond 72 hours of under eating or fasting. So that was my final thought. Hopefully I've provided some value here and didn't spend too much time belaboring certain points and talking when I could have made it more succinct. So anyway, happy to be back. I've been away for a while with a neck injury that was really quite painful, and that had me sidelined and just kind of sucking my will to live, really. And I don't mean that in any sort of dark and serious way. I just mean I really didn't feel like sitting down in front of a camera. So with that, I'll bring this video to an end, and thanks for tuning in. Hope you had a great week. Hope you have a great upcoming week, and I'll try to be back on here more often. See ya.